Hello and welcome to Western University's webinar with Dr. Kahente Horn-Miller on setting the stage for those difficult conversations, building Indigenous-centred pedagogical spaces in post-secondary institutions. This event is hosted by Western Center for Teaching and Learning in partnership with Western's Office of Indigenous Initiatives. Please note there is closed caption live transcript available today. Just click on CC Live Transcript at the top of your screen. My name is Aisha Huck, and I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. Each fall, our center hosts a conference on pedagogy to bring together a community of instructors and reflect on promising practices. This year, we're delighted to extend our keynote with Dr. Horn-Miller to our national audience. And we have over 1,000 people registered today from coast to coast to coast. As we gather in this virtual space this morning, I want to take a moment and ground us in relation to the land. I know we're joining from across Turtle Island today, but I want to acknowledge that the land I'm joining from and on which Western University is situated is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wauk, and Arawandran peoples, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. Long before settlers renamed this place London after the Thames River in England, the Deshgan-Zibi, or Antler River, as the Anishinaabe know it, was a tributary channel and home for the Indigenous nations who continue to be the original peoples to this place. Reciprocity and relationality with the land and with each other are at the heart of anti-colonial efforts as I understand them. And I invite us all to reflect on this relationality and how we can foreground it in our teaching. I'm so grateful this morning because we're joined by Elders Dan and Mary Lou Smoke, and I'm going to turn it over to them now so we can start things off in a good way this morning.
Where I come from, when we greet one another, we say bonjour. So bonjour.
Bonjour.
Hasanenas kwayan dejnakas makwa dodam bachwana bay dunjaba. For those of you who don't speak Canadian, I'm going to translate what I said in the original Ojibwe language. I said that my name is Shooting Star Woman. I'm Bear Clan, and I originally come from Batchewana Bay, Ontario, which is on beautiful Lake Superior. And I'm very honored to be sharing some of the teachings that I've learned throughout my lifetime, listening to the elders, sitting with them. And most of that time, I've been sitting beside this man here. We have been married, we celebrated 44 years this summer, August 13th, but we lived together for about 5 years before that, because that's what the hippies did way back then. And so we have done everything together. And so everything we share, we heard at the same time, practically, you know? So I think that's really special and unique. But I just want to say I'm very honored to meet Kahente Horn-Miller. We know your mom. Your mom used to be a good friend of Dan's mom, and I met her. Plus, we were also on a committee together in Toronto, and then we've met your sister as well. So it's really wonderful to meet you, and I'm really happy with the work that you are doing. You know, I remember when we were first listening to our teacher, Joe Kapoor, we were young, and we were listening. We were big sponges and absorbing everything, and Joe was telling us how he was the first doctor of psychology in Canada who was Indigenous. So he helped to set up the Indigenous Studies program at Trent University. And when they approached the university staff, people there, the power, they were saying to them, well, who do they think they are? You know, who do those little Native people think they are? So, you know, we have been showing them who we are. And we're showing them some really good stuff because we have some really talented brothers and sisters out there. And so I'm really happy to be able to welcome you to our territory. And I'm looking forward to whatever I can listen to for the short amount of time I have today here. And I'll let Dan say a few words.
Chimiquetz, Marilu, Nawe. Asanenas is my name. I'm a member of the Seneca Nation, member of the Kildare clan, and I come from Six Nations Grand River Territory. My I grew up on the Onondaga Reservation, Syracuse, New York, and then I moved back to Six Nations with my parents, and so I've been there. I kind of grew up there too. But I just too want to say I concur with what Mary Lou was saying about how far we have come, and you know, from being almost completely invisible to today, where we have the attention of the world, you know, upon us. And this is the time, as Art Solomon used to say, Ojibwe elder. He was also with the Canadian or the Canadian Alliance in Solidarity with Native Peoples with your mom. And he used to always say, it's time for us to tell our own story. It's up to us to tell our own story, and now it's our turn, because for too long we have been listening to them tell our story, and they've been getting it wrong. So now it's our turn. Now it's our turn to be heard. So we are doing that, and it's so great to have Kahente here as our guest here on our territory, Descansi Bay, and it's really nice to see you back into this. The Great Lakes watershed used to be land where the Ganyange people used to come as well, you know, because it was so fertile. Yes, Mary Lou, thank you. Yeah, it was so fertile for us agricultural people, us farmers, and you know, so here we are, all these generations later, and we're coming together, a member of the Eastern Door and a member of the Western Door coming together. We're like bookends, and we have our Ojibwe brothers and sisters and our non-native brothers and sisters all gathered here together at this time, you know, and we're going to be hearing what you have to say, and I believe it's a very good topic, very right on topic. So I'm going to let Mary Lou introduce her song.
Okay, we're going to keep it simple. Our elder Art Solomon used to say that we make things so complicated when life is so simple. You know, if we listen to the elders, then all we have to do is give thanks with our tobacco. You know, go to the water, go to the stick of fire, and take that tobacco in and put it in there. And so our good intentions can help to heal water. Water is the lifeblood of our mother, the earth. And we learned from Dr. Masaru Emoto. He was showing pictures at Oise one time of how he healed the water by talking kind words to that water. And he had pictures of water where they said horrible things to the water and told the water it was really horrible. And that water was murky and dark. So we have that power, each one of us inside us, because we have that good energy. You know, we can change those things. So we have to put our good minds together and start working to protect our water. We have to save that water for the next generations to come, the next 7 generations. And then we have to teach our children and grandchildren that that is their responsibility to continue that on. So I like to teach people the water song because I love to sing the water song. It's so simple. And it's a good opportunity for when you're teaching somebody to tell them about the importance of our water. So we're going to sing the water song. And for those people who aren't musically inclined and you can't get it the first time around, you can go to YouTube and key in my name, Mary Lou Smoke. And I'm singing a couple verses of it at Harborfront in Toronto. So, which is the water song. Wichita do ya, Wichita do ya, hey. Wichita do ya, Wichita do ya, hey. Hey ya Tanea, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya Tanea, hey ya, hey. Hey ya Tanea, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya Tanea, hey ya, hey. That's pretty simple, right? That's just the first verse. So let's try the second verse. Wichita, do ya, Wichita, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, Wichita, do ya, hey. Hey, Achenaya, hey, 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 Achenaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achenaya, hey, 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 Achenaya, hey, hey. Third verse. Wichita, do ya, Wichita, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, Wichita, do ya, hey. Hey, Achenaya, hey, 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 Achenaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achenaya, hey, 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 Achenaya, hey, hey. Okay, now we're going to sing the last verse like our life depends upon water, okay? Wichita, do ya, Wichita, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, Wichita, do ya, hey. Hey, Achenaya, hey, 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 Achenaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achenaya, hey, 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 Achenaya, hey, hey. Oh, Matakawasa. Oh, miigwech.
Oh, that's Mary.
Dan will say an opening prayer.
Okay, yeah, well, Chimiquach, Mary. Actually, this is the our Thanksgiving, and we always like to begin our events with Thanksgiving because it reminds us where we fit into this great cosmos, this great natural wonder of the world that we live in. And so every part has a place, has an important place, and every part contributes to the whole. So I just want to share a little bit about that because I want to thank every part of that because we have a new day upon us, a new Wani Sleo. And it's a day for us to be used in a good way. We're already getting a great start with our visitor who's with us. And so I just want to say, sa groundizo, sa niño, es patahas, kit kuntanwa, wahas, jawi se dodakwa, oskada nagohas, oyeda nahas. Grandfather, grandmother, hear our sacred thoughts, hear our sacred prayers as we bring our good minds and our good intentions into the circle here today. At this time, we want to give greetings, give thanks to our sister who has joined us for the day. And it's really truly a blessing because we know her family. And it's always nice to welcome visitors into the territory, especially when they are bringing a good message, those good words that we all wish to hear and like to hear, especially when we're telling our own story. So I just want to acknowledge this beautiful Wani Sleo, this beautiful day that we've been blessed with. And we always begin with the water, which is the lifeblood of Mother Earth, as Marilu said. The water is that feminine sacred element of life that all creation needs in order to survive. Nothing would survive without the water. And the water, she's still following her sacred instructions. So we want to give greetings, give thanks that the water is still here contributing to this life support system we call the creation. So be it in our minds.
Uh-huh.
We also want to give greetings, give thanks to our Mother, the Earth. That our Mother Earth is that other feminine sacred element of life that all creation needs in order to survive. Nothing would survive without our Mother, the Earth. The crawlers, the four-leggeds, the two-leggeds, the plants, the medicines, the rocks, the minerals, the trees, all the life that lives in the trees, all the life that lives on the trees. We just want to acknowledge all this, every form of life is important. Every form of life is of equal height with every other form of life, equally contributing to this life support system we call creation. So we just want to acknowledge our Mother, the Earth, for the important work that she continues to do because everything in creation is helping her because everything is a life support system for her. So we want to give greetings, give thanks that she's still following her sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds. We also want to acknowledge our Father Sky. Our Father Sky represents the air, and our Father Sky continues to breathe that life into all creation. Nothing would survive without our Father Sky. So we want to acknowledge that our Father Sky is also still following his sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
We want to acknowledge our eldest brother, the sun. Our eldest brother, the sun, has begun his journey from the eastern door, and he travels across the sky to the western door. And along the way, he shows his face. And when he does, he provides us with heat and he provides us with light each and every day without fail. For he is still following his sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds. We also want to acknowledge our grandmother moon. Right now we are in the time of the thimbleberry grandmother moon. And we just want to acknowledge that our grandmother moon also, nothing would survive without her. She looks after all female life, and she looks after the water, the lifeblood of our mother, the earth. She continues to cleanse by attracting the water from the depths up to the surface and from the surface down to the depths, so that the water is being recycled. So it's being purified. Every month she does this. And so we want to acknowledge that our grandmother moon is still following her sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds. We also want to acknowledge the stars, our star relatives. Our star relatives remind us when it is time for us to conduct our ceremonies of Thanksgiving. The Creator told us that everything is here for us, wherever we have been placed on Turtle Island. Everything is here for us that we need in order to survive. And so all we have to do in order for that, to keep that gene pool strong in every form of life, is to give thanks. All we have to do is give thanks. And so grandfather, grandmother, we are very much of a thankful people, very grateful for everything. So we always acknowledge our gratitude. And the stars remind us when it is time for us to do that. So they are still following their sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
We also want to acknowledge the thunderers, the thunder beings, very important. They wake up and shake up creation during the time of the thunder moon, when it's time for the mukwa, the bears, to come out of hibernation, when it's time for the wata, the anatig, to start running from the wata anatig trees, the sweet water. And that sweet water, sap, is very important because it's a medicine for us. It's a medicine that's full of vitamins, full of organic chemical elements that we need in order to fortify our blood. So there's zinc, magnesium, iron, and a multitude, about 51 other different elements. And if we drink that, a glass of that a day, then our blood will become fortified so that after a month's time, it's time for us to go out and prepare the lands for the harvest. It's also time for us to go out and prepare the lands for the hunt, for the future hunt, because people depend upon the hunt as well. And we always give thanks for the hunt, and we always give thanks for the harvest. So we just want to acknowledge the thunder beings, very important. And right now, their responsibility is to bring the purifying rains that cleanse our mother, the earth, and that also give her a drink. It's been a very hot summer, and the thunder beings have brought a lot of rain. So it's been good for our plant relatives. It's been good for our four-leggeds. So we just want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, that the thunder beings are still following their sacred instructions, grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
We also want to acknowledge the four protectors. The four protectors are those four celestial beings who look after all spiritual matters. We all have spirit helpers that help us, that help guide us to our faith, to our belief system. So we acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, that these four protectors who are responsible to the Creator, Sagwayantizo, Yishamanado, the maker of our bodies. We acknowledge, grandfather, grandmother, that the protectors are still following their sacred instructions, and they work with our spirit helpers. And we all, some know about them, know how to communicate with them, know how to work with them. Some are learning, some are may not know. So, but we all have them, and they are there to provide a spiritual guidance system for us. So we want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, that the four protectors, nothing would survive without them, are still following their sacred instructions. Grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds. And lastly, we acknowledge the Creator, Sagwayantizo, Yishamanado, the maker of our bodies. Everything has been put here for us. We don't have to leave Mother Earth. We don't have to leave the Great Lakes watershed. We don't have to leave this continent, because everything we need is still right here. And it will stay here. It will always come back every cycle, as long as we give thanks. So this Thanksgiving address reminds us to give thanks for everything in creation. And so if we begin the day with the Thanksgiving, at the end, we can also acknowledge our gratitude for having had a good day. So in the spirit of our ancestors, we say, Chimigwech, Nyawe, Ulalan, Tapwe, all my relations, Daneto, hi hi.
Takawasa.
Aho.
I'll turn it back over to you. Okay. Miigwech.
Nyawe, Aisha.
And have a great day, everybody.
Chi Miigwech, Dan, and Mary Lou, I'm so grateful for your teachings and that you could join us this morning to help us open this space. I have three quick comments for everyone about logistics before we get started. Today's keynote is being recorded and will be available to attendees on Western Center for Teaching and Learning website once the video is ready. Our session ends at 11 and we will have time for questions. I invite you to post your questions using the Q&A feature throughout Kahente's keynote and right after. For anyone joining from Western University, we have two additional sessions for you this afternoon, including a panel highlighting Indigenous student voices and a workshop on Indigenous pedagogies. So those reminders will be posted in the chat for you. I'm going to ask Dr. Candice Brunette-Debassier, Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Education and University-wide Teaching Fellow in Indigenous Learning, to introduce your keynote speaker.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's nice to be with you today and see such a great turnout. And it doesn't surprise me one little bit that we have this thousands of people registered and tuning in this morning. It's a real treat, and I'm so delighted to join in. I'm actually a Cree woman originally from Treaty 9 territory, and I get have the honor to work at Western. Along the land of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape people. And today I'm joining in from Manitoulin Island, and you can see the beautiful Lake Mindemoya in my background. So it's really good to be with you today, and more importantly, to welcome our guest speaker and keynote of Western's Fall Perspectives 2021 conference, Kahente Horn-Miller. Here at Western, we've been working in the Office of Indigenous Initiatives and through the Center for Teaching and Learning for some time, more specifically in the last couple of years, really thinking about how to make sustainable, meaningful, and ethically driven curriculum changes at our institution. And we learned about some of the groundbreaking work that I believe is happening at Carleton University through the leadership of Kahente Horn-Miller. And this is one of the reasons why we've invited her here today to share with us her experiences of guiding that work at her institution and being driven by her own identity and culture as a Mohawk woman. So we're really in for a treat. If you don't know a lot about Kahente, I'm sure she's going to introduce herself, but I'll just say a few words about her, since sometimes we should recognize all the great accomplishments that Kahente brings. And she is certainly a trailblazer in the field of education. She's a mother, a grandmother, an educator, a leader, and a doctor. I won't forget to say the doctor piece. She's Mohawk from Kahnawake, and currently working as the inaugural Assistant Vice President of Indigenous Initiatives at Carleton University. She's an associate professor in the School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies, and she's a passionate educator. And I'm just so excited, and I'm struck by her generosity. I've had an opportunity to get to know her a little bit, and I hope to continue to build that relationship. But there's such a sense of generosity and sharing in how she carries herself, and I'm just so excited to learn with all of you from her today. So I'm going to end that and pass over the floor to her, and thank you everyone for joining in. I'll be moderating after the talk some Q&A, so feel free to throw your questions in the Q&A feature. Miigwech. It's all yours.
Okay, how's the sound? It's good? Great. Nyawakoa, Candice, Anisha, Dan, Mary Lou, Western, everyone there. Thank you so much, Nyawakoa, for inviting me to join you today. Kahente Yuchats, Akskare Wake, Ni I Kanyak keha'ka, Nyawanjoto. What can we do to I introduced myself in my language, Kanyageha. My name is Kahente, which means she walks ahead. I was given that name because I was born 2.5 months early. And so it reflects the circumstances of my birth and the work that I do, I think, within the academic community, but also too, within my own family. I was the first one to have a child amongst my sisters. And as well, my family was the first to bring forward a grandchild. So I continue this leadership, I guess, in many, many different ways. I'm also Bear Clan, and I do this announcement. I bring forward who I am as Kanyak keha'ka first, because it's all about making space, right? This is what this talk today is about making that space in these institutions. It's our way of creating that little bit of opening so that we welcome you in to our world. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a story. I don't speak for anybody else. This is an account of how things are as I see them. It's my journey. It's my story. Take what you will from it. Challenge yourself with it. I'm not here to tell you what to do, Western or anyone at Western or anyone across the country on Turtle Island, but I'm here to share my knowledge and share my story with you so that you can learn if you want. So I'll begin at the beginning. I was born, as I said, 2.5 months early in Montreal. I have an older sister. My mother raised us on her own. I'm Kanyak keha'ka, or Mohawk, from Kahnawake, and we are a matrilineal people. So that means I trace my descent through the female line, through my mother. And of course, through the Indian Act, we are registered with our father's band. So I was registered at Six Nations, where my father's from. He's a Miller. But being a matrilineal people, when I came back to Kahnawake as an adult, I registered myself. I changed my membership to Kahnawake because I wanted it to reflect my close ties to my mother and that understanding of our matrilineality. Now, often we are confused as being a matriarchal people. We are not. And a lot of the work that I do in my research and my writing and my engagement with others is to teach people that we are actual equal in terms of the male and female perspective, the things that we do. It's about survival, actually. And I bring that knowledge into every place that I find myself. You know, and through the years, as I'll describe, in the university setting, whether they were male, female, of another nation, I would engage with my professors and the people that guided me through those institutions with a sense of equality, with a respect, and was treated much in the same way, which is surprising, I think, for some of you out there that might not have experienced that before. I think it's how you carry yourself and how you create that space. So how do we do that? That's the question. So when I was born, my mother only spoke in Kanien'keha to my sister and I, my older sister and I. And so I've got that foundation. She wouldn't let anybody speak in English to us. And so I have that foundation of the language, which is really important in the work that I do, in who I am, because I bring forward that understanding and that philosophy and into everything that I do. And I think it's grounded in the language that we have. It centers us, even as young children, when we carry that root of the language, the traditional language of our people. It sets a good foundation, whether you end up not speaking it later on or not. And that's actually what happened with me. Was my mother was a single mother, as I said, and was working, had to find work in Ottawa because at the time people would travel back and forth. Some of you might have listened to the podcast about her Coffee with My Ma that my sister produces. And she talks a lot about the different experiences that she's had, with many, many jobs that she got fired from. So at the time in the 1970s, in the early 70s, she knew she had to kind of put those things aside and find steady work so that she could raise us. So we ended up moving to Ottawa. And this is where the story really, I think, begins in terms of influencing my work now today. So that's a good 45 years ago, if we think about it. We moved to Ottawa, and at that time we entered into the daycare system and then into the kindergarten system. And we had to learn English and French all at once because that was what was required of us. And so my mother stopped talking to us in our language, and we didn't have people coming and going in our house that spoke Kanien'keha to us. So in a sense, that part of it stopped. And I've asked her since then, why did you stop speaking in the language to us? Why? It came from a real sense of inquiry, a real sense of injustice, And she said, it's because I want you to fit in. Now think about that for a moment. What does that mean when we take away the language, or we stop speaking our languages so that we can fit in? It's not about creating space. It's not at all about creating space. It's about giving up space so that we can survive. So through high school, I had to take English, I had to take French. My sisters and I, we were known as the girls with the funny names. And for some of you I know who are out there in the audience who knew me as a young girl in Ottawa, you knew that we carried our Mohawk names with us. We didn't have English names. We don't have English names. And we would proudly use our Kanien'keha names, but we were known as the girls with the funny names. And one of the things about making space in that context was that our mother said, she explained it to us when we were kids. She said, you are not allowed to have a short form. You are not allowed to have a nickname. And that's really important. And I remember as a child saying, well, why? Why? It would just be so much easier for people. She said, because that means then they're not saying who you are, because your name speaks to who you are as a keha'ka person, as a Mohawk person. And it comes from us and our family and our community and our way of engaging with the world. That name is unique to you. No one else should have that name. And so I, over my lifetime, even to this day, I'm still asked, well, is there a short form? Do you have a nickname? And I have always said no, and encouraged others to learn my name. And as well, I've taught that same lesson to my children and said, you have a responsibility to open up that space and have that conversation with those around you. When they ask you, do you have a nickname? You say no, but let me explain what my name means to you, means to us, and let me share it with you and let me teach it to you. And so I've heard so many stories of people, friends and acquaintances who agonize over learning the names of myself and my children so that they can share it properly and speak to us with respect. And if we think about it, that's where these openings begin, is about respect. Even as young children, we can ask for that, and we have a right to ask for that. And we have a responsibility to ask for that. So teaching our children that they can ask for others to learn their name, even if it takes quite a lot of effort or many tries, it's the respect in trying that comes out of that engagement and that trying. So these openings begin very young for our children. And so it's our job to teach them. So I spent many years in Ottawa, and, I've always wondered, where did I learn about our philosophy so that it carried me? I mean, I told you before, it came from our language, right? And that's the root of it. But there's so much more that my mother gave to us, just by example, in the way that she carried herself, in the way that she engaged with others or had others engage with us as her children. We lived in a small house when we first moved to Ottawa, and she gave us the bedroom, the three girls, and she slept on the couch in the living room because the house was so small. And she rented a room so that she could make ends meet. But every night we ended up sleeping with her, all of us in the bed with her. And that was normal, and that was safety. So she created this safe space for us where we felt strong in our hearts and we felt good in ourselves, and she nurtured that. And that, I think, is the first memory of what it means to lead by example in terms of motherhood. And I think that for me, the work that I do, the way that I raise my children, the lens that I take on the world, my pedagogical practice, my research methodology, the way that I teach my students is all through that lens of motherhood, because that is the foundation, at least for me as a woman, keha'ka woman. I often call my students my academic children. And I am the first one, when they come across that stage, when they graduate, I cheer them on and I stand up and I give them hugs. And I say, I am so proud of you. And I follow them and they come back and they visit with me. And I continue to nurture them. They come back all the time. Because our responsibility is actually not just in those instances when they come to our classes, further on. Because we are the leaders, we are the ones that set the we are the guide. We set the path. There's a word in our language for a clan mother, odiane, odiane, and it means she sets the path. And that's what I see as a keha'ka woman within the institution, within my family, is that I'm setting the path forward. And how did I do that? It was a very difficult one, I have to say. You know, we grew up in Ottawa and we would go back to Kahnawake, but we didn't really go through the longhouse. We didn't come into the ceremonies as much in those days. And so I knew that I was keha'ka. I knew I was Mohawk, and I would use that term Mohawk at the time. But then 1990 happened, the Oka crisis. And for many of us, that was a very pivotal point where we suddenly, across the country, Indigenous people went, whoa, okay, what's going on here? For me and my sisters, suddenly we were Mohawk. There was something about being Mohawk that was very crucial and important, and something important was going on. And our mother was right in the middle of it all. So like I said before, in the early 1970s, she put aside her activism. She put aside her voice so that she could create that space for us to grow, to nurture us as her children. And so she put that side of her away. And so we didn't know. I had no idea that she was an activist. And I remember as a child, sometimes people would say, are you going to be a feminist like your mother? Are you a feminist? And I'd look at them and say, no. And so when 1990 happened, it was a real awakening point for me, my sisters, because there was our mother standing up with others behind the lines at Aksotha, and my two younger sisters were there with her. And I remember feeling this sense of awareness and pride, but I wasn't sure what that meant. And I watched and I worried, proud, after it ended. And I went to UBC. That was the first institution that I went to. I decided I'm going to leave Ottawa. I'm going to go somewhere else and start my university there. But I was lonely. And I think there was very few Mohawks. I was the only one at the institution at UBC. And I remember in that first term, wandering around the university, and it's so huge. For lots of you who know, it's a very big, daunting place. And at that time, they didn't have the First People's House of Learning. So that opening, that space wasn't there. We were stuck in these little huts, they called them. And they were placed in the back alleys behind the main buildings. But that was where we began as students to connect with each other. And I began to meet other Indigenous students on campus and began to see myself in relationship to other nations, right? And I think that's where I began to understand the responsibility I have as a keha'ka. Now, at that time, I still use the term Mohawk because that was the term that we all used. That reclamation of our own language, our own way of describing ourselves as keha'ka only came after 1990, in the 90s. And so I would go to class and I'd sit there and I'd be oftentimes the only Indigenous person in the class, or there was another one of my fellow students. And I always questioned, how do I learn about myself? How do I keep that pride? How do I create that space for me? I had no Indigenous professors at that time. And I was in anthropology. So what I started to do was, I went to the library, the stacks as they call them, for those of you who know. And you wander through and they really are stacks. There's floor to ceiling books. And I began to read everything in there. Everything about Mohawk, Iroquois, anything I could find. I read the red paper, the white paper. I read all these things and I began to learn what had been written about us. At the same time, my mother was in court every day with the people from Kanesatake, and she and I would have these long telephone conversations, and I would question her on the Great Law, on our philosophy, on the Longhouse traditions. And she would also fax me at the time, reams of papers that Louis Hall wrote, the Longhouse News, the different kind of things that came out of our people at that time, through the 70s, through the 80s and the 90s. And I began to learn. I learned an interpretation of those things, but then I began to see, this is what is written about us. So in my classes, what I would do is choose a subject to write about for my coursework that was something that I wanted to learn about. And I was really fortunate, I think, at the time, because I conducted myself in a way where I asked my professors, in the way that I conducted myself, I asked my professors to respect me as a human being. I'm not just your student, I'm a human being, and I'm your equal. And I think some of them were taken aback, but others were quite open to engaging with me. And I would go talk to them and say, I have an idea for this paper. And so I ended up writing about these things and really engaging with those written materials that are out there. I mean, the Iroquois people and the Mohawk people are one of the most widely studied. And there's lots written about us through colonial times, and anthropology, the Iroquoisists, Fenton and others. There's lots and lots out there. And I just read it, I absorbed it, I thought about it, I engaged with it. But at the same time, I was engaging with the other students around me, the Indigenous students. And I still carried that sense of justice and pride that came from seeing my people stand up during Oka. I remember there was a course I took Canadian literature in the class. I said, we were talking about what it meant to be Canadian. And I said to the class, I said, I'm not Canadian, I'm Mohawk. And everybody turned and they looked at me. But it was about me creating that space. But then I had to explain myself. And that's what happens all the time for Indigenous students, is that when we create that space, we are asked to explain that and explain it again and explain those explanations again. That's what I found in the writing. When I do my written, when I publish, I have always had to explain who we are as the Mohawk people, as part of the larger Iroquois Confederacy. Every time, in order to situate the reader, to situate the learner, I've had to consistently create that space time and time again. And even in the public talk to, I always have to situate myself and say, this is who I am as a keha'ka person. This is who I am in relationship to the Confederacy. We are. This is our responsibility, right? And it's always about creating that space and embracing it and bringing you in. But where else does that happen? I've never heard any of my professors have to do that, right? But that is something that we find ourselves doing. As well, being an Indigenous person in a class as a young person. I remember being put on the spot all the time. It was as though you have the answers for all of our questions around what does it mean if you're not Canadian? Who are you then? What does that mean? What is it about Canadian, the history of the relationship between Indigenous peoples in Canada? So I found myself in that position all the time, but you know what? It was a good learning ground for me, and I was not afraid to take it on. I was not afraid to do that because it helped me learn. It helped me to find my voice and find myself and begin to create that space and find my path in academia. So I ended up home. Everyone moved back. My sisters and my mother. And I went home and I went back to UBC after the holidays, and I decided I'm going to finish the
We're just having a bit of technical difficulty. I think we can see you again, Kahente. Can you? Oh, your mic is off, Kahente, but I do see you. Yep, let's give
How's
it a whirl.
that?
There you go.
Thank you. And so I moved back. I decided I was going to finish that year, and I went back to live with my family and to give birth to my daughter, my oldest daughter. And I was really fortunate because all of my sisters were there. My mother was there during the birth, and they supported me. They held me up. And that was unheard of, I think, in those times, where large groups of family would be there for the woman's birth in these local hospitals around Kahnawake. So once again, we created this space, right, for our family to embrace the birth of first grandchild. So she was born. Her name is Karniokohe, which means she takes the sky out of the water. And when we were looking for her name, we knew it had something to do with the rain, the water, the birth of consciousness, because that's what she did for us. All of us in the family, is she made us aware of, well, I became aware of my role and my responsibility as a mother. My mother became a grandmother. My sisters became aunties. And we knew we had to look beyond to see what else, see beyond, so that we could create a world where she would survive, and she would have everything she needs to survive. And so when, as you know, for many of you who have children, there's that larger awareness that takes place, right? Where you realize, oh, I'm responsible for others. I'm accountable to my children. I am accountable to my grandchildren. And that was what I embraced as a young mother. So I started I finished my degree at Concordia, and I started a master's right away. And I had a second child, another daughter. And I remember I would bring my daughter, my older daughter was 4 at the time. And I was taking anthropology, a master's in anthropology, and I was the only Indigenous person in that program. And I would bring my daughter to school with me, and she would sit next to me and color, and I was the only person doing that at the time. And then when my second daughter, Gogoa, was born, I'd bring her, and I would create that space once again. I said to my professors, I'm back and I'm going to continue with my studies, and I would like to bring my baby with me. And so I would sit in the class, and she would be passed around, and it became another situation of creating that space where they understood what family meant. I began to bring my co-students, my fellow students, into that world with me. They would ask me questions. You know, all of these were young women who didn't have children, but they had lots of questions. And all of this knowledge that came and this awareness of the world, I began to put into my research and my writing and my coursework. I began to examine this issue of Indigenous identity and what that means, because I was thinking about it for my children, right? I had to apply for band cards for them. I had to get services for them. I had to prove their identity. So all of these things were paramount at that time, right? And so that I brought that into my studies, and I began to teach others about that. I taught my instructors about that. And once again, I conducted myself as an equal. And it wasn't that I demanded the respect, or demanded that kind of engagement. I just did it, right? I took what I was learning from our traditions in the Longhouse, where we talk to each other and we engage and we tell these stories. And I began to bring those kinds of teachings into the academic setting. Now, at the time when I moved back to Kahente, I started taking language lessons, and I started bringing my children to the Longhouse with me, my family. And so I began to see and understand more clearly my responsibilities there as a woman and in relationship with the men, right? So that tradition, like I said before, we are not a matriarchal people. Women are not more powerful than men. There's an equality, a responsibility. And so we see that. I began to understand that as we danced in the Longhouse, where we dance in the inner ring in a counterclockwise direction, and the men dance in the outer ring. And so there's a support. And the men will sing the woman's song, and that will support. It's a way to acknowledge and show respect for the role of women in nurturing the children, in planting the gardens. And as I danced, and I danced with my children, I came to fully understand that. And so that was also what informed how I would conduct myself in the institution with my peers and with the faculty. And once again, I didn't have any Indigenous faculty. There were no Indigenous professors at that time. So when I would engage in some of these issues and look to them to try to further my knowledge and in my master's program, right, which is where in a master's program, as I understand it, and I come to teach it, is that in a master's degree, you begin to engage with the theory. You begin to push back against things and really grapple. You learn how to be critically engaged with the knowledge that's there. And so I began to critically engage with the Iroquois-ness, the work that had been, the stuff that had been written about us, the research that had been done. I began to push back on that. But in order to help my professors understand what I was doing, I had to explain that. And once again, out of having to explain that, I pushed myself in terms of my knowledge and my ability to explain why I was doing what I was doing so that I could create that space. So I ended up doing my final paper in my undergrad on Louis Hall, and his art. And I was encouraged by one of my professors to work into a master's degree. So I ended up doing my master's degree on, and that was where I began to grapple with Indigenous research from a Haudenosaunee, which is one of our core ceremonies that we do, that is all about listening. It's all about opening the eyes and opening the ears and cleansing the throat, so that when we engage with each other, we engage where we listen fully, we see, nothing clouds our vision, and we speak with no harsh words. I had participated in that in the Longhouse at that time, and so I understood that, and I brought that into the work that I was doing with my master's thesis. And so I felt, what is the best way to bring the readers in? If I'm forced to write my thesis, then what is the best way to bring the reader in to our world and put them through ceremony? They can engage with my work through the lens that I'm showing them. So I wrote it was a narrative piece where I'm taking the reader through the small condolence in the Longhouse, and Louis Hall, is sitting there, and he's smiling and he's listening, and you're going through this process so that when the time comes to enter the next section of this thesis, you're ready. Your eyes are open, your ears are open, and your throat is clear. And especially for those who are deliberating on my work, you're ready. And so that was really, I think, the first time that I really began to push back on, anthropological, the standards that we were taught in anthropology. And I said, wait a second, there's a whole other way of doing things. And I didn't forcefully push back on what I was being taught, but I gently pushed, and I consistently pushed, and I made that space through that engagement, through that dialogue, continuously explaining and having long conversations and illustrating and helping my advisors to understand what it is that I was doing and why. And through that, I was able to successfully create this written work that is about the Mohawk warrior flag. And for those of you who don't know, the flag is the one that we saw flown during 1990. It's the red flag with the Mohawk warrior in profile. Many of you still see it today at different protest sites. it's become a symbol of resistance, and it's a rallying cry for Indigenous people. So after that, I decided to continue into a PhD. And I wanted to continue with looking at Indigenous identity, keha'ka identity. So I had to take courses. There was no Indigenous professors in the humanities doctoral program that I was in. There were no Indigenous professors at Concordia at the time. So I had to create the program. And I was very fortunate. I entered a program that was multidisciplinary, that allowed me to create what I needed to create to do the work that I wanted to do. And I was very fortunate as well to have an advisor, Daniel Saleh. And I was his first student, his first doctoral student. So I think maybe that helped as well. But it was a long process for him of teaching him about who we are and why I was doing the things I was doing. I went from wanting to do research on how my people express their identity in journalism, art, and other areas. And of course, that's too big. And so over time and through practice, and engaging on these issues, I realized, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to interview 8 women from my community to understand how they express their keha'ka identity. So what I did was I interviewed women ranging in age from their early 20s to their late 80s. And in those conversations, what I found was they would talk about Sky Woman as though she was in the room. And I thought, oh, okay, I have to think about this. There's something there. I knew the story. There were murals painted on the walls in my community. I knew it's an important story to us. But I decided, well, I have to revisit this. And I did. And what I ended up doing was looking at different versions, and I thought, there's still something missing here. And so in order to really go into it and understand its simplicity and its complexity and its meaning for us as women, I began to rewrite it in the first person. And I remember I had my 3rd daughter, now my son, at that time. And she at the time was very tiny, and I would nurse and I would write the story. And I engaged and I incorporated all the elements in that were consistent through the different versions, but I began to write from her perspective, Sky Woman's perspective. I brought elements of those lives of those 8 women into that story. For those of you who know the story, she falls from the sky world and she lands on Girl's back, and she's pregnant. She brings the medicines with her, the tobacco and the strawberries. And she gives birth to a daughter who then, through the story, becomes pregnant through time and ends up dying in childbirth. And I hadn't experienced the death of any of my children. So one of the women that I interviewed did. And that was part of how she expressed her relationship to her children, her relationship to the community. It's a huge part of her story. And so I was able to understand what that meant. And I brought that into the story. So I brought that and other things that informed how Sky Woman lived her life here on Turtle Island, and how she conducted herself and how she became a grandmother to the twins. And that story became the basis for my theory and my method. So once again, I'm creating space, right? I'm saying, and you would think that looking at keha'ka women, I was gently encouraged to look at white Western feminist theory or Black women's theory and to inform how I would examine the lives of these women. I said, no, hold on a second here. I said, I'm going to examine the lives of these women through our theory. And I really made a point of not reading any of those other theories, other theoretical models, so that I could understand these lives of these women through that lens. And so that became the basis. The Sky Woman story became the basis of my theory and my method, my research method. And I successfully defended. And I began to work in my community. But in 2014, I ended up applying to Carleton, of course, as a visiting scholar. I had been teaching part-time and working in governance, doing consensus-based decision-making with the community decision-making process. So I was able to enact some of what I had learned in the Longhouse, in the work that I do, and in understanding the political system and the issues that we face as Indigenous peoples. But then I brought that knowledge to Carleton, and I began to teach there. And it really opened up a world for me. But when I arrived, there was Indigenous people, there was Indigenous faculty, but we were all over the place. The School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies was not that yet. It was the School of Canadian Studies. And I saw bits and pieces of what people had been trying to do over the years, you know, like Madeline Dion Stout, John Kelly, and others who had, in a way, set the path for us, those of us who came along. And I really thought, okay, there's more that needs to be done. There's things that need to be pulled together. We need to create a sense of community in order for our students, Indigenous students, non-Indigenous students, to work together, to learn from each other, to learn from us as Indigenous faculty. So we eventually ended up changing the name of the school to Indigenous and Canadian Studies, which I think correctly reflects what we do right now, which is create a space where Indigenous and non-Indigenous can engage with each other. Because I think that's really crucial as we move forward, is creating that space where our students can have those difficult conversations, right? So this comes out of 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where Mary Sinclair said, those difficult conversations have to be had. The work is not on the part of Indigenous peoples to make the change. It's on the part of everybody. But how do you do that? How do we do that in an institution where things have been in silos, where things have been set, these paths have been set a long time ago? How do we create those spaces? And that's what I really questioned myself with. I thought, well, I'll just continue to do what I'm doing, and I'll bring the philosophy of my people into this institution, and I'll teach others about it, the other faculty, the administration, what that means. So I ended up, listening to Murray Sinclair, and he tasked us all. I was very conscious of this. He tasked us as in these post-secondary institutions to begin to bring more knowledge, more Indigenous knowledge into our classrooms, right? So I was teaching at the time undergraduate courses, and I had the opportunity to apply to the Ontario eCampus system to develop one of my courses into the online environment. And I ended up creating this course using modules with knowledge keepers, and it became the basis for this work that I'm sharing with you now, which is the Collaborative Indigenous Learning Bundles. And it was it was the basis for understanding how might I bring what I do that is successful in the classroom into the online environment in a way that allows for people to and has them engage with our knowledge in a way that creates the space, right? So I was on my way back from downtown Ottawa I was asked to co-chair an event with Marie St. Clair and others on what are institutions doing, bringing knowledge into the classrooms, how are they doing this? And I was on the bus back to campus and I realized, oh, what if I create modules that can be applied across disciplines, that different faculties, different departments can use? Because everyone questions, right? How does Indigenous knowledge relate to what I'm teaching? Math, science, engineering, but it does. So I put forward a proposal and began to develop these bundles that I know Western is working on a project now to develop collaborative bundles that are similar in format. And I want to explain to you that these bundles are all about building that community, creating that space where we can have those conversations, right? Because that is really cool here as we look to our future, right? We're facing climate change events. People are suffering, and we have to think ahead to those coming faces, those children under the ground, those faces yet unborn. What is the world that we want for them? How do we set the path so that those children have the opportunity, so that our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren survive? And that's not only Indigenous people, but that's non-Indigenous people as well. And I think one of the crucial things about that is that we need to be able to talk to each other and have those conversations. So these bundles, I think, create that space where we can have those conversations, much like the ones that I had all those years that I went through university, right? But they create a safe space where faculty can learn about Indigenous knowledge, where the students can learn about Indigenous knowledge in relationship to what that course is about, but then also engage. Because if there's one skill that we need to share and that we need to send our students off with, is that ability to talk to each other with respect. With their eyes wide open and their ears open, with no harsh words. That is what we need to teach our students so that our world can survive. So I know I'm closer to time. The screen has frozen.
We can't hear you.
Time. You can.
Your bandwidth is a little low, Kahente, but we can kind of hear you coming in and out. Can you hear us?
Okay.
Me?
Okay. I'm going to try switching. Can you put that up on the window and then I'll connect it? My
Oh. There we go.
Is that okay?
Yeah, we seem to be able to hear you. I think that's working.
I need the password. Is it better?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, but that's okay if that works.
I'm just gonna. No, it's not. Oh, okay. I'm just gonna switch.
So I just, as Kahente gets herself settled, I'll just ask and remind people to feel free to put your questions in the chat. We're going to have a brief Q&A period. Hopefully, if the technology here repairs itself. I don't want to say any of the questions until Kahente is settled. So.
There we go.
Excellent. So you can hear us?
I can hear you.
Did you want to say a few? We can hear you.
There is a lag. There's a lag.
There is a lag, yeah. And it says the bandwidth is low.
Okay. Okay. Should we try that? Just give me 1 second here. Do it off my phone. I'm doing it off my phone. Just a sec. There, how's that?
It seems to be better. I don't hear a delay. I can't see you, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. I can see myself.
Okay.
Great.
So
Okay.
I'd like to give you an opportunity to say, a few closing words, and then we can do the Q&A if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's great. So I think what I am trying to impart to our audience, and especially to the Western community, is taking up the challenge, and it is a challenge, to open up spaces where we can begin to dialogue with each other. Oftentimes our students come in, Indigenous students come in, and even Indigenous faculty come into these places, and they feel a lack of community. They feel a lack of an ability to be themselves. And I think what helps in that is creating that sense of community. And that's what these bundles do in the work that I do now with Carleton, is it creates that sense of community. We have a community of practice built around the use of the bundles, where faculty who use them in their courses learn from each other on what works and what doesn't work. Faculty that haven't used them learn from others in how they work. And essentially what they do is, as Murray Sinclair instructs us, and the TRC instructed us, is that it's up to Canadians to make the change. And so these bundles are a gift of knowledge that creates a safe space for the faculty, non-Indigenous faculty who have most likely not learned, or learned very little to nothing about Indigenous peoples through the education system. It enables them to learn about Indigenous knowledge and work with Indigenous knowledge in a way that is safe, that is accountable, that expands their understanding of the world beyond the Eurocentric view, beyond the world that is created, right, and brings you into the Indigenous world. And we at Carleton, we've had over 1,000 students. No, 11,000 students engage with our bundles.
Amazing.
And I constantly hear from students about what influence it has on them and the work that they're doing, and the shift that they make in terms of the research that they want to, and the path that they want to follow. And so, we've as our job is to create that path. And so I've taken, as you can see, I've taken that to heart, and I bring that into the institution. And so I encourage you, don't be Don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort. Be brave in whatever you do. Be brave and take up those challenges and have those conversations and teach your children and teach your students how to engage with each other with respect. It is so necessary in these times. And it is so necessary for our future generations that you do this. Because beyond the institution, beyond ensuring our children have a degree, the proper education to have a job, our job is foundational for teaching them how to be good human beings in this world. And our world needs that. Mother Earth needs that. She needs us to do that. So I just want to leave you with that and encourage you to take up that challenge. Go for listening.
I think we have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions, and then we do need to turn it back over to Dan and Mary Lou for our closing. I think I'll begin with a question that was sent to me a couple days ago from Dave Montour, who's Mohawk from Six Nations. And his question to you is, among the difficult conversations, could you share your views on the need to decolonize or indigenize evaluation and making rubric and in the making of rubrics in particular? So that's
yes. Yeah, I think about this a lot in terms of what is it that I'm trying to impart to my students and how do I want to respect their way of learning, right? So the kinds of assignments that I do where, we have a responsibility as academics to have our students evaluated, right? It sets their mind, it gives them a peace of mind to know I'm doing okay, or I'm going to pass this course. But in there, you can choose different kinds of assignments that will enable them to give you back and help you understand how they're learning the content in a way that is reflective of their own ways of understanding and their ways of communicating. And I think really as it is, it's rooted in that idea of respect, right? Listening to our students, listening to their needs. So I've done assignments where I have them create a wampum agreement. So I teach them all about what early relationships were like between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, what wampum belts are about, mnemonic devices, respectful engagement. And I have them create a wampum agreement with their roommate or family member, but they have to also communicate that in as few symbols as possible on a wampum belt. So they draw it out. And I've had students create earrings out of this. I've had them do, and they love it, but from that, they understand what that means, what respectful engagement means and relationships mean. I've also had students, I often do consensus-based decision-making in the classroom, where I take students through, let's say in my graduate seminar course, I will have students engage on I teach a course on Indigenous politics and resurgence. So after about 3 classes, I have them sit down and they do consensus-based decision-making, and I break them up into clans, and they engage on defining what is resurgence based on what they know so far. Right? And so then they use that definition and they critically engage with it throughout the rest of the course and in the readings, and they juxtapose the readings and the dialogue and the conversations we're having in the class to that definition. And then I see at the end, I ask them, okay, we're once again do consensus-based decision-making and rework that definition if it needs reworking. And so it helps them to learn how to talk to each other. It helps them to engage with the materials in a way that holds each other accountable, because you can tell in a group, in a small group, who's done the readings and who hasn't, right? And so they hold each other accountable to the work that needs to get done. I've also done memes where I've had students partner up and they take the readings and they take some of the salient points out of those readings, and in partnership they dialogue. Okay, what is the most relevant point? Why is it relevant? And then they create a meme out of that. And so it teaches them how to do that work, how to write, how to research, how to critically engage with the knowledge, but they're giving it back in a fun way, right? That speaks to their love and affinity for social media, right? They see memes all the time. So I think really, having students engage with the knowledge and give it back to us in a way, it's about respecting them and having them engage and give it back in a way that is meaningful.
Miigwech. I don't know if we have much more time for any more questions. Unfortunately, it is 11 o'clock. I've gathered these questions and I want to thank everyone for your engagement. It's been, I can see that you have stimulated a lot of thinking and a lot of what I can sense from the audience through the questions is that people want to do this work. There's an appetite, there's a desire for this work, and I'm just so grateful that you have stepped into that space and you're stepped ahead, just like your name. Your story resonated with me on so many levels, and you are living it, you're embodying it, and you're helping show us the way as well. And at Western, we are really at the very beginning of our journey, but we look forward to continuing to engage with Carleton and other scholars like yourself and create that space because it's time. So Chi Miigwech, Kahente, for your generosity, for your courage and your willingness to share with us. We are really grateful.
Yeah, go everybody.
Unfortunately, Dan and Mary Lou did send their regrets. They had to jet off to ceremony today, so they did have to leave. So we will be wrapping up the session without them. But just ask everyone to take a moment to put your feet on the ground, to give that gratitude in our hearts for this time together, and to put that vision and that intention, that good mind forward into this work that we're obviously all care really deeply about. So I want to just take that moment to take that breath to be together and say Miigwech again.
Miigwech, Kahente.